All right, we'll get started then. Welcome everybody to the course on Python and SQL. So this would be a 15 plus day course, and every day we'll have about 1.5 an hour of duration of this particular session, and it starts at 8:15 p.m. In the evening. All right, IST, Indian Standard Time. So that is when this session starts on a daily basis. All right. So before we begin, let me give a brief introduction about myself. I have about 16 plus years of experience, and I have done in various MNCs prior to this, and then I worked on technologies like Java, J2E, Python, big data, data science, etc. And I've also got experience working at Google ANC in California. And I've conducted more than 1,000 sessions, both in offline mode and in the online mode. So to begin with, we'll try to understand what essentially is a programming language. So a programming language is something that we execute on a computer. But why should we learn Python, and how the programming languages are structured around a computer machine is what we'll try to understand briefly before we get started into what exactly is Python. So as you see, we have at the bottommost layer is essentially the hardware, which could be a motherboard, CPU, processor, and the RAM, hard disk, and the cooling systems that is there for the machine, etc., which is essentially a fan. So that is what essentially is comprising of the hardware. And then we have the external devices like mouse, speakers, or probably a lab, or probably a keyboard. This is what we would refer to as a hardware. And we would like to uh, do something with this particular hardware, and that is where we try to install what is called as an operating system that takes instructions and then are passed down to the hardware. But then whenever there is an instruction mechanism that is there, we generally have what is called as a machine language. That is basically what an hardware understands, right? So that is what the instructions are passed on to the hardware, and that is what is a machine language. And then we have an assembly language on top of a machine language. So assembler is something that actually translates the instructions from assembly language to a machine language. But then writing machine language and assembly language is very difficult, and it takes a lot of time to learn them as well. And that is the reason why we have these kind of programming languages. And these kind of programming languages that are on top of assembly language and machine languages are generally high-level languages or low-level languages, right? And majority of the times that we come across the IT industry, or wherever we see software being deployed, we are kind of using high-level languages in order to translate instructions to the hardware, so that the high-level languages translates them to the machine understandable instructions, right? That is why we try to go with a high-level language. So this is how the various languages are kind of stacked up on basically the hardware. So when we want to write or give some instruction to a computer, we would generally prefer these kind of high-level languages, so that it becomes very easy, the kind of construct, or it is much more similar to English. That is why we try to use these high-level languages. So Python is one kind of a high-level language, but then before we jump on to Python, there is a slight difference between how a high-level language behaves with respect to a low-level languages, right? So whenever we try to give instructions to a computer, right, we are generally giving them in this high-level programming language, right, where instructions are passed on and then they get executed on computer hardware. Right. Primarily, why we choose high-level programming languages, that it is a lot more easier for somebody who learns a programming language, very easy to learn them. And Python is a lot more easier compared to other programming languages that we have. The learning curve for learning Python is kind of easier as compared to other programming languages. But then there is a kind of a trade-off that we try to make with respect to a high-level programming language as compared to other programming languages is that they are not really memory efficient. When we say memory efficient, probably is not something that we'll try to understand right now. But then that is one of the advantages. Memory is generally, when we talk about memory, it is basically the RAM that is available on a hardware. But then we'll not get into those details as part of this course. But then these are some of the things that an high-level programming language will have advantage over a low-level programming language. And then there are also some disadvantages with respect to a high-level programming language. So most important aspect for somebody who is beginning to learn a programming language is that these high-level programming languages are easier to learn as compared to low-level programming languages. That is why we tend to learn these high-level programming languages. So we'll jump on to Python and try to understand how Python is designed as a high-level programming language. Now, the person that you see on the slide right now is basically Guido van Rossum. He's the person who actually kind of built Python. He wanted something to work upon, and then he wanted a syntax that is much more easier than C. So he kind of built Python on top of C. C is again a particular programming language. The symbol C or the alphabet C in English alphabets is what he was working upon, but then he wanted something much more simpler than the C programming language. And then he started developing this programming language called as Python. And this began as a project in 1989 and 1990, but then it got released in 1991. So he is actually the chairman of one of the foundations of Python called as Python Software Foundation as well. And he is somebody who has developed a Python programming language, right? And when we talk about Python programming language, it is under the category of high-level programming language. It is much more easier to learn and then kind of try to program in it, right? And when we talk about programming languages, right, there are different categories of programming languages. And the most common categories that we come across a programming language is basically an interpreted programming language and a compiled programming language. These are the two broad categories that generally people talk about. One is interpreted programming language. The other one is the compiled programming language. And Python is basically an interpreted programming language. And what does it mean? Is that it kind of translates instructions line by line. It reads line by line, and then it kind of converts them into machine understandable code. That is what is basically an interpreted programming language. That is what Python is all about. So why should we learn Python is that there are a lot of job opportunities with respect to Python, and it is very easy to learn. And we'll see one of the applications of Python, how it is used in AI. That is something that we'll look at. And as we go further, we'll try to see how it is being used with respect to AI. I'll demonstrate a simple example on that, and then we'll get onto that, right? So there are a lot of companies that are using Python, and these are some of the major companies across the globe that use Python very widely. We have Google, Dropbox, Facebook, OpenAI, Amazon, Firefox, Yahoo, NASA, YouTube, and a lot of other companies that use Python very widely. And my experience with Google is that they use, even for the internal tools that they use there, are built in Python. So these are the companies that use Python very widely. And some of the things that are there with respect to Python are the opportunities. There are a lot of opportunities with respect to Python. About 60,000 opportunities are there with respect to Python. And there are different roles that are being offered with Python. Essentially in the domain of IT. We have software engineering roles, Python developer roles, data science roles, and data engineering roles. And one of the fundamental prerequisites for these roles is that you need to be skilled in Python. That is what the resume they look for people essentially with respect to the job roles that are available for Python. So with respect to Python, we said it is essentially an interpreted programming language. So what does it mean is that we have a source code, and then the source code is read line by line, interpreted, and then the output is generated for that particular programming language. It is essentially how Python works internally. That is what it means when we say this is an interpreted programming language. Uh, we have the set of instructions that are written in a file, and those instructions are read line by line by the Python interpreter, and then the output is generated. This would be the sequence of flow, but then we'll try to look at them when we start executing them and try to understand what it essentially means. So Python could be executed line by line. That is what it means, and we'll try to see the demonstration of that. So when we say Python, and this was the programming language when it started as about probably 30 years before what we are talking about today. And then what it means is that it is used widely across various domains, essentially for website development. It is also used for programming. It is used for ML AI applications. I'll demonstrate some of the ML AI application as we go further. And fundamentally, when it started out, right, it was basically a scripting programming language that was used in the software domain, and it was called as a scripting language. But over the years, and essentially after 2013, 2014, it has been brought into what is called as the data science domain, and it became very famous. Essentially used for data analysis. It is used even for linear algebra, mathematical domain, scientific computing, and as well as distributed computing. So these are some of the areas where Python is used widely, and its use is kind of getting adopted everywhere these days. And some of the new programming languages that are also coming out these days are built on essentially Python. So we'll look into what these applications mean or where it is used as we go further. We'll essentially start this entire sessions right from basics, trying to understand how a programming language could be used when it comes to Python, and we'll try to slowly get into the complex aspects of it in a very simple fashion. All right, so one of the governing bodies of the programming language with respect to Python is Python Software Foundation, or PSF. And as we discussed previously, the Guido van Rossum, who is essentially the developer or somebody who has developed Python, is the chairman of PSF, Python Software Foundation. It started about 10 years later after Python was introduced or released. It started in 2001, and that is where a lot of different libraries also with respect to Python started growing, and a lot of applications of Python started coming out. So that is where PSF played a very important role in making sure Python is adopted widely, not just as a scripting language, but also has its applications across various domains and various departments as well. Right. With respect to what we are going to learn in Python is essentially is that we begin with a primary understanding of how to use Python. Then slowly we'll get into what is called as IDE. It is basically an editor. IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment, essentially to build applications using programming languages. We'll come across this later, but to begin with, we'll use what is called as a Jupyter Notebook, which is widely used for running Python programs. Very easy to use. And also, we need not really install anything if we have a Google account, but then we'll use the Jupyter Notebook using a Google account for the first few sessions, and then we'll slowly get into the IDE aspect of it. Right, so we'll try to understand what Jupyter Notebook is and how to run a simple program with respect to a Jupyter Notebook, some basic commands on the Jupyter Notebook, right? And then we'll try to understand the fundamentals of Python as a programming language. We'll try to see what it needs in order to understand a programming language, how instructions have to be given. Probably we would have used a calculator. That is how we'll start our session with. We'll try to understand simple operations and then get into the fundamentals of Python using various variables and see how different kind of variables could be handled in Python. Then Guys, there is one question from one of the participants. Looks like you're not able to view the screen. Is everybody able to view the screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes, sir, we can see it.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. So, all right. So I was mentioning that we'll get into some of these aspects and then see where it how it will get into the complex aspects of it, and then we'll try to understand the operators with respect to a programming language and how it is used in Python as well. Then we'll see conditional statements, essentially try to understand what decision making is when it is belonging to a programming language like Python. Then try to understand how data could be stored, not just one value, but multiple values using the concepts of data structures. Then we'll try to understand Python functions, then modules. Modules is essentially, try to bake the code into different files and then use them, and how it could be packaged in different directories as what is packages. So this is the objective of this Python session, and then we'll move on to SQL. And once we complete Python, then we'll start SQL as well. Very basics of SQL. And when we get there, I'll try to share the course curriculum for SQL as well. All right. So what I'll do now is at a very basic level, we'll try to see the application of Python. So I'll try to demonstrate how Python is being used now, essentially using a software called as ChatGPT. Everybody would have heard about what ChatGPT is. It is making news around the world, and already has said that AI would be the next big thing that would happen in the future, and it would be very disruptive, right? So let me try to share how we could use ChatGPT using Python. We know ChatGPT is essentially something where we can do a conversation with respect to some machine learning model that is being built on a hardware, right? That is what it is. So I'll try to run that quickly and see how Python is essentially used there as well. So I've opened up what is called as a Jupyter notebook right now, and then I've imported few statements. Probably this is not really needed for us, but then I'll try to demonstrate how Python is essentially used for ChatGPT. Let's say I want to ask a machine which is kind of built or trained on certain data, and then we want to ask it, can you provide a recipe for preparing paneer butter masala? It is just like on the phones that we have, essentially like Siri as an application, or if we have Alexa, right? Alexa, right? So that is what we would want to do. So give instructions to these kind of machines, and then they can perform those tasks. But then ChatGPT is essentially built around right now text and images. So let's say I want to ask ChatGPT that I want to get the steps for preparing paneer butter masala, right? And then it has to give us the ingredients that are needed and also the steps, right? So let's say somebody at home asks us, because you're coding Python, why don't you kind of tell me the recipe for preparing paneer butter masala, right? So we are giving an instruction to this, and this is something that is becoming much more, very famous these days, which is called as prompt engineering. And this is basically using ChatGPT. And a lot of opportunities are there with respect to prompt engineering, where writing proper prompts and giving this to the machine, it will give us a reply back, and that reply could be used in order to build something else, right? We want to construct sequence of outputs based on these prompts that we are providing. So a prompt is essentially like a question or a set of instructions that we would like to give to some machine, essentially like ChatGPT. And then it has enormous data, and then it starts looking for that answer because it is trained to give answers to the questions that we pose to it. So I say something like, please provide recipe steps for preparing paneer butter masala. This is the prompt that is being given to it. But then there is an UI interface also that could be used in order to get the response back. But we can also do this with Python, right? And programmatically using Python, we'll be able to generate the response. So we are giving a statement like this. Please provide recipe steps for preparing paneer butter masala. This is what we are referring to as prompt. We'll come to the syntax later or the set of instructions, how it is being given here. So we say prompt is equals to, and then F triple quotes, and then the prompt or the value of the prompt or the sentence that we want to ask or the question that we want to ask. And then it is closed. And then I use something called as get underscore completion and then pass this prompt as an input to it. So that is how we pass an input, and we have get underscore completion, and the response is got back in the response variable. There's all Python, but we have not started. Just to demonstrate what it means by using ChatGPT from Python, we'll try to understand this. Right. So execute this. I have to use Shift Enter in order to execute a particular set of instruction that has been written in this box here. So I execute this, and then it generates an output, right? And it generates an output just below this particular box here. And we see ingredients, and the ingredients are provided here, right? So it says 200 grams paneer, 2 tablespoons of butter, 1 onion chopped, 2 tomatoes chopped, etc. So the set of ingredients that are required for preparing paneer butter masala is given here. And then we have various steps of how that particular recipe has to be prepared, right? It says cut the paneer into small cubes and keep aside, heat butter in a pan, etc. Right. So we have about 8 steps that it produces for the given prompt, right? So we have the prompt, and then it also gives us the response back. So what I've done is I've connected to this ChatGPT using a library called as OpenAPI. This is something that we have not discussed, but this is how we could write it. Okay, so it uses an output like this. So as we go further, there will be a huge number of systems like this. And using programming languages like Python, we want to embed this kind of logic into the code and then generate the response like this. So over the internet, my question was passed on to ChatGPT, and then ChatGPT responded back with the response, and then we printed out that response. Right. So this is not something that we knew already. Right now, the machine is trying to search for answers. It's just like what Google is doing right now. We search for Google certain queries on Google, and then Google has an interface, and then we kind of get the response back. But now, as we go further into the future, we'll see a lot of data being utilized, a lot of images being utilized, and then we will see these kind of generated outputs from the machine itself. And this is what machine learning, data science, AI is being doing, right? So things would change further. And right now, prompt engineering is something is in much demand, essentially. And people with prompt engineering skills are hired at a higher salary. Right, so this is what it means to do a prompt engineering, and it kind of gives us the response. Another example is like, let's say I want to understand what will happen to AI in the future. Can you please let me know? This is a question that I have, and I execute this, and then it sends me a response, or ChatGPT sends us a response in this fashion. It says that it is basically a AI language model, or it is an AI interface, and it cannot predict the future with certainty. That is what it says. And it gives various options of what could happen to AI in the future. And there are different aspects that we might have to consider, and it points out each of them with the subtitle that is mentioned here, right? It says increased automation could happen, improved personalization could happen, advancements in healthcare could happen, enhanced cybersecurity could happen, and ethical considerations are something that we have to take care of. So, and it also gives the explanation of what this subtitle means as well, right? It says what does subtitle means, and it gives us a statement for each of them, right? So that is what is happening, and it gives us a summary of what it has responded back. It says overall AI is expected to continue to evolve and have a significant impact on various aspects of our lives, right? So a machine is giving us an output for a given question that we have, right? And Google was already treated as some kind of a demigod. Now we have different AI tools coming up, and one such tool is basically ChatGPT. And we can use Python to, build these kind of interactions with respect to the different artificial intelligence tools that are coming around. Some might need Python, some might need other programming languages, but the de facto standard right now, or the famous programming language right now as of today, people have adapted for about last 5 to 10 years is Python. And we'll look at what ChatGPT also thinks about which programming language is better for AI. And there is one prompt that has been asked to ChatGPT. So how do we know ChatGPT is being asked? So Python helps us to do that. So this is what we provided. So there is something called as a GPT 3.5 Turbo. That is what is provided to it. And we have coded it in using Python. And then I asked this question to ChatGPT, which programming languages are better for AI? And it comes up that it gives an answer saying that, for the given prompt, the answer that we receive is that there are different programming languages, and it lists Python as one of them. And also it brings up the summary for this particular prompt saying that there are different kind of programming languages, and depending on the requirements, one could go for this kind of programming language, right? Python is one of them, right? So this is one application of Python where we could use Python as a programming language so that we can interact with ChatGPT, one very application. And prompt engineering is something that is becoming very famous these days. Essentially, after OpenAI released ChatGPT last year, and then this is some field that people are expecting might grow, or maybe next 6 months we'll come to know how prompt engineering grows. But then as of today, people are asking for prompt engineering specialists, which is right now there is a lot of demand for it. All right, so this is how prompts could be built, and then response could be generated, and then these response could be constructed a lot better. If you want to use HTML, or if you want to use something else, so that we want to build a website out of this response also, this is something that we can do in Python as well. So this is where this becomes interesting, that already there is a AI tool that is generating a lot of stuff for us, and then we can interact with it, and we can give instructions to it. And already we are seeing how Python could take instructions, but then using Python, we can also give instructions, or instructions could be given to AI tools like ChatGPT. Right, so this is one example of it. So we'll begin with Python today. And for this, I will share a small file. And for that, we could use Google itself. That is essentially, an open source execution environment that is provided by Google called as Colab. So probably for this session, you don't have to install any software on your individual machines. All that is needed is to upload a particular file to Google Colab. So let me demonstrate what Google Colab is. So let me log in. So if you search for Colab, right? So this is the URL, collab.research.google.com. And if you are already logged into Google, it directly takes into the page. Otherwise, we might have to log in and then come to a particular place here. And then you will see something like this, a window. And then if we have already worked on this, there will be listings of files. Otherwise, we can create a new notebook. Or if there is already an existing notebook that I'm going to provide now, we can upload it from here. There is an upload tab, and then we can browse it, and then we can upload that. All right. So I use this here, and then say open, and then I click on upload, and this opens up a notebook for an existing previously created notebook can be used in what is called as Google Colab. So we need not really install any software as of now, but then we can start using it directly in this Google Colab environment. Right, so let me share this. So I'll share the Google Drive link, and then we can get started. Is my voice audible, guys?
Yes, sir.
All right. All right. Hope everybody is able to access the Jupyter notebook. So the Jupyter notebook has an extension called as IPYNB, IPython notebook. IPYNB stands for IPython notebook. And then we upload that to Collab, right? So let me share the screen again. So we have uploaded the notebook to the Collab, and this is how it looks like. And in order to execute statements in Collab, we would use Shift Enter. And then in order to connect to Collab, we can connect it to a hosted runtime. So all this environment that we see here is basically a Collab environment, and it helps us, to run instructions on the runtime that is provided by Google. So Google is providing this entire interface where we can run Python directly on the infrastructure of Google. So that is what we are trying to do here. So that is what this runtime that you see here. So connected for a hosted runtime, it provides certain disk space and it also provides certain RAM. So as we hover over it, it says it is about 1 GB of RAM that is being allocated, almost 1 GB. And then there is about 13 GB of disk space. That is what is allocated here. So that is what we see here. You did not receive any file. Okay. So can you click on that link? That is there in the chat window, the drive link. Google Drive has been shared, right? Please, no link is there. Okay, just give me a minute. Just give me a minute. I think it's gone to only one individual. Just give me a minute. Probably you might be seeing it now. Is the link available now? All right. So please download the notebook that is available in that folder. See if it is accessible. If not, then I'll go ahead. Okay, you have downloaded. Please upload it to Google Colab. Google Colab is the environment where we will be able to run statements for Python. Please upload it to Google Colab. For that, you need to have a Gmail account. And in order to log into Google Colab, uploaded it successfully, everybody. All right, please go ahead and try to upload it. All right, the file name that we have here is called as 01-introduction to python.ipynb. So ipynb stands for IPython notebook. That is what it indicates. That is what the extension of these Python notebooks are generally. They end with ipynb, and the name of this file is 01-introduction to Python. Right, you would see something like this. There are a set of cells. What we see here is essentially a cell. This rectangular piece that you see is essentially a cell. And then we have different cell statements here, right? And these instructions that are given are essentially in English, right? And then there is Python Python instructions as well. There are places where you would see instructions in English, and there are places where you would see instructions given, and then there is an output just below that instruction, right? So the first instruction that we see here is introduction to Python. And then the next set of instructions is the following concepts shall be covered in the notebook. So these are the set of concepts that are covered in this notebooks. We have print statements, variables, different data types, and string formatting. These are the different topics that are covered as part of this notebook, right? That is what we'll be seeing in this notebook or in this file. And before you start executing them, I would request you to connect to a runtime that is provided by Google. So it says connect to a hosted runtime. Click on that, and the Google infrastructure automatically allocates certain amount of RAM and hard disk to this particular notebook. All right. So that is what would happen when you say connect to a hosted runtime. And there are a set of other options probably that we are not interested in. We'll not get into the details of Colab though, but we'll try to understand what Python is by using the Colab interface provided by Google, right? So for this, we need a Google account. In order to log in and start using Colab, we need to have a Gmail account. That is what we are trying to do here. And then whatever is inserted already in this notebooks, these are cells that have been constructed, right? And there are certain cells that are there in text, okay? Ones that you see essentially highlighted in bold are essentially English text. So it says introduction to Python. There's one cell, and then there is another cell that says the following concept shall be covered in the notebook. These are the different topics that we would cover. And then there is printing output. So how do we start printing output? So the first thing that we'll do is we'll say hello to everybody, saying that we are using Python. This is the standard way of saying hello in programming language, which is called as hello world. So I wrote this statement, print, and then opened a parenthesis and then provided a single quote, and then hello world has been written, and I close with a single quote and then close the parenthesis. To execute this particular cell, because this is Python, we want to execute this and see what output is generated. We have this play button here on this cell that you see here. Either this could be used so that this particular instruction that we are giving to Python gets executed, or we can use Shift Enter. So we can use Shift Enter or use this play button. Both of them work. If you would like to use keyboard and then start using it, then use Shift Enter to execute this particular cell. A cell is a piece of area that gets executed again and again when it is run. We can have two types of cells. One is a code cell. The other one is a text cell. What we have previously written is basically text cell, and the ones that we are trying to execute right now, basically writing in Python, the first statement that we have written is basically print and then hello world, right? Print and then open parenthesis, then single quotes and hello world. That is what we have written, and then close parenthesis. And then we want to execute this, right? I use shift enter. So what happens is when we run this, Python understands that it has to print output, right? It has to print something to the output. So the output is basically this area that it utilizes and then prints the output. And the output is basically hello world. It does not use print or anything. Only the one that we are writing in single quotes and that is being passed to print is what is printed out. So we are getting hello world as the output, right? So we say print, and then in single quotes, we provide the text that we want to use, and then we close the parenthesis and then execute it. The output is generated. We get hello world, right? So in Python, whenever we want to use sentence and print them out, we enclose them in either single quotes or double quotes, and then pass it to print statement so that we want to see the output, right? That is what we use. So that is what we are trying to do here. Print hello world is what is being utilized by Python to print an output called as hello world. So this is a basic standard way of saying that we have started using a particular programming language, and that is what is called as hello world, right? It is from the programming language to the world, saying that this is what has arrived at. So we are trying to say hello to the world. Hello world is what is being printed out. The same thing can be written in a different way. I use print parenthesis and then pass hello world in double quotes, right? So then also it is the same. In certain programming languages, only one kind of quote is allowed, either single quote or double quote. But in Python, in order to write sentences or what are called as strings, sequence of words are enclosed in what is called as a string, and they are put in either single quote or double quotes, right? In Python, we either use single quote or double quote. Both are allowed in order to represent strings or sequence of words or a sentence, right? So both of them print the same output, hello world to the output, right? This is basically the output area that we see here, and the output area we see hello world, right? In order to execute this, we are passing this to what is called as print. So we are saying hello world needs to be printed out to the output, and that is what is being passed to print, and then it prints to the console or to the output area. So anything that is printed out is what is called as generally a console. That is what we refer to as a console. But right now here, this is the console area where the output is being printed. So if we hover around this cell, right, you see this two plus symbols. One plus symbol is having code with the text. The other one is having text. So if we click this code, we can write codes, Python code just like this. But if you want to write text that is below, then we can use this text symbol. If you click on this, it will create a cell like this, and then we can type in something. And this is Python programming is what I'm trying to type in. And then if we use shift enter, this also gets attached. So whenever we want to write some say something like instruction or something which is describing what is happening below, we use this kind of a cell. This is written in Markdown. That is what is basically representation of English here. So this is called as Markdown, Markdown. And if you want to represent that or in a notebook or in HTML, we use Markdown. So that is what is written in English. That is what we want to describe what happens below with respect to the programming language we want to describe. And that is what is generally written in a Markdown, or any kind of a description that we want to provide that is written in a Markdown, right? The first thing that we have done is printing this output, and this is called as hello world. Hope everybody executed and are comfortable with Jupyter Notebook on Colab. Any questions so far? Any questions, guys? All right, if there are no questions, then we'll get into the next set of concepts with respect to Python. So whenever we want to represent something, right? There are different kind of ways which we want to represent, and why are we using programming language is essentially, make sure the machine does something, right? Essentially execute some kind of instructions. So how are these instructions provided, right? Instructions are provided using numbers or some kind of specification, which is described in the programming language, right? So if you want to do a calculations, we use numbers. If you want to print out something, saying something is successful or something is not successful, we use string statements, right? That is what we try to use. So there are different kind of operations that we can do, just like what we do in mathematics or calculator, right? We use numbers in order to compute something or calculate something. So when it comes to a programming language, with respect to calculations or computations that we want to do, the numbers are represented in various ways. And these are essentially called as numerical values, and they could be of different types. So numbers are essentially called as numerical values with respect to a programming language, and there are different types. In Python, we have essentially three different numerical representations. One is called as the integer representation. Then we have the floating representation, and then we have the complex type representation. So for anything that is a whole number, right, without the decimals, such kind of representations are called as integers. And anything that we want to represent with respect to decimals, right, that would be a floating point number. And anything that is not a real number, but a complex number, that is represented as a complex type. This would make more sense as we do certain examples. Let's say I type in 22, right? And then execute this particular cell. So this is a coding cell that I'm using. This is basically a coding cell. And I type in 22 here. And this gives us the output as 22, right? So this is a integer type that you see here. And then I do 22.32. And this is basically a floating type. This has a decimal. The number has a decimal. The previous number doesn't have a decimal. This is of integer type. And any number that is having a decimal is basically a floating type. And for a complex number, we have the real number and the imaginary number. So a real number is essentially this part, which is not having j or I. And the imaginary number is something that is represented like this, 4j. So a complex number is something that comprises of two parts. One is the real part, the other one is the imaginary part. We'll not get into the mathematics aspects of it, but then there is one of the types that is represented in Python, and it is generally having two parts. Complex number has two parts, a real part and an imaginary part. A real part does not have j or I representation. An imaginary part will have a j representation like this. We say 4j indicates that 4 is the dimension with respect to the imaginary space, and this is the real space. So 3 plus 4j, right? So that is what we have here. 3 plus 4j is the complex number that we have. And this is how it is represented, 3 plus 4j. You can give floating point also. That is not an issue. It would just be a real number, right? Any real number can be given in the floating. Not an issue at all. All right, so this is how we represent. And we can perform various operations on the numerical values that we have. And fundamental operations that we are going to look at is basically addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and exponent. Right? These are the fundamental operations that we would like to provide. Let's say we want to sum up 4 and 3. So I say 4 plus 3. This will give us the output as 7. Okay, this is what we have. And I want to subtract two numbers, 8 and I want to subtract 3 from 8. So I say 8 minus 3. That would give me an output of 5, right? Similarly, I want to multiply. Multiplication can be done using the star symbol that is available or the asterisk symbol that is available on 8. So we use shift and then the 8, and then we get the asterisk symbol. And then I want to multiply 5 with 3. And this would give us the output as 15. So this multiplies. So Python can do operations that are available in a calculator, right? So this is a very fundamental operation. So we can do that. And now I want to divide one number with the another. So I have 5 and I want to divide 5 with 3. So this gives us 1.666, so on and so forth. So, and ends with 7. So this is essentially a floating representation of what we have done. And we have used 5 and then the front slash, and then we have used 3. So, right. So it is giving us 1.667, right? This is what we get. And let's say I want to do the same thing with 2 double slashes. So there is a difference between a single front slash and 2 double slashes, right? What happens is if you use a single front slash is that it uses the decimal also, right? Whatever the quotient that it uses, right? So we have a numerator and then we have a denominator. So when the numerator is divided by the denominator, it gives us the output as the quotient, right? That is what we get here, 1.666, right? And the same thing when we do 5 front slash 3, this is essentially 2 front slashes. And when we do this operation by 3, then we get the output as 1, right? So it uses the quotient as 1. What it means is when we use this 2 front slashes, then it gets rounded off. The value that we have 1.667 is rounded off to the nearest integer, which is basically 1 here, right? So that is what it does. So this is what happens when we use 5/3 or 5 front slash 3 and 5 front double slash 3. So this is what happens. Okay. So the same thing could be verified using something that rounds off perfectly. So 12 divided by 2 is 6. So this also gives us a floating point representation. 6.0 is what is given here. And we see the output as 6.0. Similarly, when we do 12 front slash by 2, then it gives us 6. This is what is the output, right? So 6.0 is what is the output when we do by a single front slash. And when we do a double front slash, it gives the output as 6. Similarly, if you want to find the power of a number, let's say I want to find the power of 2 when it is raised to 3, which is basically 8, right? This is what we get as the output. So 2 to the power of 3 is basically 8 as the output, right? So how do we write this? 2 and then 2 asterisk symbols and then followed by 3. 2 to the power of 3 is what is 8. This is what we get here. And similarly, when we do this, right, 4 to the power of 2 is what we get as 16. Right, this is what we get the output as. So 2 to the power of 3 is 8, 4 to the power of 2 is 16. This is the output that we get. Right, so this is how we can use some of the basic operations on numerical values. We can use addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and then we can also use exponential representation so that we get the power of the number. There are other ways also of doing this. Probably as we go further, we'll look at them. But for now, I think this is how fundamentally we can use Python as a calculator for simple operations, right? This is how we can use them, right? All right, any questions so far? All right, if there are no questions, then we'll go ahead. So there are a couple of things that we have here that are given to, try. So I would request you to use the print statement that we have already done to run these exercises. Probably you can run them now. Just see how if hello world is being printed or not. So just try to run them very quickly. So what I would do is just run them in this fashion. So this is what you can do. And this would give the output in this fashion. And then we can also use double quotes to check the output. Right, so this is how the output is generated. And similarly, if you want to get the output that is given here, we can run this in this fashion. The same thing could be put in double quotes and then we can get the output as well. All right, so this is some of the things that we can use for printing the output to the console. All right, right? So this is how we can print string to the output. So if you want to kind of, let's say we want to kind of print numerical values, right? So let's say I want to print 20 using the print function, then we just pass 20 like this, right? So this kind of prints 20 to the output when we want to use the print function. Now, please note that when we are running in a different way, possibly print function need to be used. Just because we are using Jupyter Notebook, we can print the output either this way or whatever is the last line of the cell, right? Let's say I write 20 here and then I do a shift enter. 20 would also be printed out, right? Even though we are not really using print function in order to print it, it still prints the output just like that because we are using a Jupyter Notebook. Okay. All right. So now, let's say we are using a particular value and we want to know what its type is, right? So we have something called as type, which is an inbuilt function in Python. And then I pass something to it. Let's say I pass 20 as a value, right? So type of 20, it prints out saying that it is int, right? What does this mean is 20 is represented as integer type, and the short form is int, the type is int, or what it means, it is basically integer. That is what it means. So the type of 20 in Python is integer or int. It is called as int. So type of 20 is int. Similarly, for a decimal value, if we try to pass it to type, let's say I pass 13.2 to type, then the output that is printed is float. What it means is 13.2 is of type float. So we use this type function in order to find out what type a particular value is. So if we want to find out what type a particular value is, we pass that value to the type function and then it prints out the corresponding type. And this is very useful when we do a lot of programming. It helps us understanding what type is used. Very useful as you go further, but right now at a very basic level, it helps us identifying what type of data it is. So let's say I pass Python, which or a string value. I pass a string value, essentially passing it as Python in double quotes. I pass a string value. So we know this is string, but how does Python recognize it? It is string. So it is doing underneath this. Python is recognized as string, but how do we know Python is recognizing this particular string value as string? Is that we pass that value to the type function, and that we come to know that it is basically a string value. And how does it represent? It represents using str. Str stands for string. That is what it means. Okay. Similarly, let's say we want to type something like this, 3 plus 4j, right? This is a complex number that we know already. This is how it is represented in mathematics for a complex number. And then we want to know the type of it. And it says this is a complex data type. So we have seen what's an integer data type. We have seen what's a floating data type. We have seen what's a string data type and a complex data type, right? Integer is essentially something that is whole in nature. It does not have decimals. A floating data type is something that has decimals. A string is something that is enclosed in double quotes. That is what is string. Anything that we want to represent as string in Python, we put them in double quotes, right? That is what we do. And we have seen what is a print function. Print function prints out the output to the console. That is what print function does. And we have also seen what a complex number is. A complex number is a sum of two parts. One is a real part, the other one is an imaginary part. This is being passed to the type, and then it produces an output called as complex. That is what we see here, right? So these are the basic numerical values that we have. First one is the integer, second one is the float, and the third one is the complex type. The other data type that we have seen in the other ones, not the numerical values, is basically string data type, right? These are the fundamental data types that we have covered, right? Now, so far, what we have done is we have just represented the data as it is in the cell. For example, we have done 20 and then say print 20, right? But then if I want to reutilize or utilize it again and again in a program, how do we do that? And that is where what comes as is basically a variable. Now, variable we could understand it like something where we give a name to it, right? It is basically a noun, right? That is what is a variable is. And it's like, we have different kind of people around, but then every person has a name, right? A name is there, but then that name is not written on that person, but we identify a person based on certain features and then give it a name to it, right? That is how we identify a person. Similarly, for a programming language, when it comes to software, we have values that are being recognized by the programming language, but for our interaction, how that value is being used within that programming language, we give names to it. And that is what is a variable all about. Variable is essentially a name for certain values. That is what is a variable. So I want to represent these values with some names, and we use what is called as variables, right? So let's begin with that. So I want to say provide 10 and give it a name. I say X. And how do I provide value to it is using equal to and then say 10. So if we recall our mathematics, right, this is how we used to do it, right? Any value that we wanted to assign, we give what is called as a variable. And right hand, we have two parts to it, right? We have a left hand side and a right hand side. Left hand side is essentially the variable name. Right hand side is essentially the value. And what lies in between is basically the equal to. So we have the left hand side and then the equal to and then the right hand side. So the right hand side is assigned to the left hand side, right? So now we are assigning a value to a variable called as X. So X is equals to 10. That is what we did. And then if we execute this, there is no output because this is basically an assignment that has happened to a variable, right? We are not printing out anything to the output. Now, if you want to print something to the output, so we have already assigned 10 to X, right? We have already assigned 10 to X, and now we want to print this to the output. So I write X in this cell, which is basically a code cell, and then execute it. So we get the output as 10 to the console. So X is the input to our input cell. And then when we execute it, it says the output that is available is 10. So 10 is what is being assigned as the output. Fine. So what we see here is that we assign a value to a particular name, which is English alphabet or a name, and a variable has its own way of declaring it. We'll come to how to name variables as we go further. There are ways in which we have to name variables. And we'll also understand what is called as mnemonics. When we say mnemonics, it is always better to give a meaningful name rather than give some dummy name to a variable, right? As we go further, we'll also try to understand what mnemonics mean. Mnemonics are generally, an easier way of representing something so that we can remember them, right? And that is what programming language also is about, so that when different people work on the same software, it becomes kind of kind of an understanding between various people that the variables representations are good so that they understand what it means, right? So that is what is mnemonics all about. Mnemonics is about remembering or naming the variables with some meaning to it, right? For now, we are just going the way we use in mathematics. So we say X is equals to 10. And then we kind of run this. This assigns a value of 10 to a variable called as X. And then when we execute X, it prints out the value as 10. All right, now how do we check the type of the variable X, right? We use the type function and pass X to it. And it says that the type of X is integer or int, right? That is what we see here. The output is int, and that is what is the type of X, all right? And similarly, let's say we have another variable Y, and then we assign 20.33 to it, okay? 20.33 to it is being assigned to Y. And then I pass Y to it. So Y's value is 20.33. Okay. So 20.33 has been assigned to Y. I execute this. There is no output because this is just an assignment that has taken place. And now I write Y and execute this. We see that the output is 20.33 for the particular value of Y. Right. Now, how do we check the type of Y? So we pass Y to type. And then when we execute that, we get the value as float. Okay. So this is how we'll be able to assign values, see the output of the values, and also see the type of that value, right? That is what we see here. And let's say Z is equals to 3 plus 2J. That is what we have. And then I assign to it. Okay, nothing happens, right? All that we see is that, I mean, we really do not understand what is happening when assignment takes place. But if we want to kind of know what has taken place, we either have to print out that particular statement or that line. So in this case, I want to print out Z, and it says it is 3 plus 2J that has been assigned to Z. That is what has happened in the previous cell. And then now I want to know what the type of Z is, right? The type of Z is basically complex, right? When we execute this, we get the complex as the output. So the type of Z is essentially complex, right? So Z, we know, is a complex number. It has two parts. One is a real part. The other one is a imaginary part. How do we retrieve the real part? So we say Z dot real. So dot is called as the dot operator, and it could be applied on variables, right? And as we go further, we'll use a lot of these dots. As we go further, we'll see them. But for now, if you want to extract the real part of it from Z, Z's real part is 3. We want to extract it, then we apply this real on Z. So Z dot real will give us 3.0. And similarly, Z dot image or imaginary part will give us 2.0. Right? So we have two parts, the real part and the imaginary part. The real part's value is 3, the imaginary part value is 2. Right? So there is a small exercise, guys, below. So what I would request you is using this formula, try to compute the area of a triangle and print out the area of a triangle. Right? Just take about 2 minutes to run this program. Try to see if you are able to do this. Otherwise, I'll run it after 2 minutes. All right, so I would compute the area of the triangle in this fashion. We know the area of triangle is, I would call area of tri, right? The variable name is area of tri. So we have two variables already. Base is 20, height is 15. So the area of triangle is half base into height. Okay, that is what is written here. And then we want to print this out. So I would say area of triangle is and then I use a comma here and then pass area of triangle, right? So it says the area of triangle is half base into height. So I should give base as, instead of b, I should give base here, and instead of edge, I should give is height, right? Then this should work fine. So area of triangle is essentially 150. So we have area of triangle, the value is 150. So half base into height is what we get here. So it is 150, right? So this is how I represent the area of the triangle, right? The next thing is, let's see how we can format strings using the print statements. So let's say I have something like this. So we have hello, and we have something like backslash n, and then we have EW and then world. And then when I print this out, what happens is that if we provide this backslash n, this is basically an escape character generally used, but then backslash n in programming languages means that it is a new line. So till hello, it understands it as one line, but then backslash n is not printed out. It hits enter, backslash n is also enter, and then it prints out EW world. So this is what happens, right? So if you have in a single quotes and then we are using backslash n, then two different lines are printed because backslash n is essentially treated as a new line, generally in programming languages within a string, right? So then we want to include that backslash n in the string, then we write something like this. So I say print and then r and double quotes or single quotes and then hello, and then I give backslash n, or I would give same thing, nothing different. Right, the same thing is provided, and then it gives us the statement or the output as we have passed within the print function, right? So print is basically a function that accepts the input and then prints some output. That is what print does. So it is basically a function. And there are a lot of such functions that are inbuilt in Python, and that is what we are doing here. So print, and then we have R. R stands for raw format. And then I'm trying to pass a particular string. The same thing that we did previously included that backslash n. And when we execute this, right, it prints out the entire sentence as it is, or the entire string as it is, right? But if we didn't provide this raw format, right, this R that we have provided here within the print function, if you have not provided it, right, it breaks that particular sequence of sentence into two lines, right? That is what happens. And that is what we see here. Alternatively, let's say we want to use a different way of printing it. We can use something like this. If we use one more backslash before the backslash, that is called as an escape character. So it kind of escapes what is coming after the backslash. There is another backslash, right? So that is why this is escaped, and then it prints out the output as it is. And so we get hello backslash new world, right? That is how we will be able to print them out, right? So these are some of the ways in which we can use print statements. One is the basic way where we provided nothing, and if there was a backslash in between, then backslash n in between, then it would break that particular sentence or string into two lines or multiple lines, depending on how many of them are there. But if we had something like this, where we have hello backslash new space world, then this would print the output as it is, hello space backslash new world. And if you have backslash and then backslash new, right? And this would act as an escape character, meaning that whatever is there after it, it escapes that. So if you have two backslashes, then the first backslash, make sure the second backslash is present, right? And it is not indicated for its purpose, as happened here, right? When I say for its purpose, when we use backslash n, it broke the sentence into two. Now it does not break it when we use backslash again in between. So that kind of character is called as an escape character, and backslash is used to escape it. Okay. So let's say we use, instead of backslash n, we use backslash t, right? I use backslash t and then I use word, right? So just I did like this, right? And I printed this out, or I executed. It provides a lot of space in between, right? The reason is backslash t stands for tab space, right? And it provides a tab space between each of these two words. And that is why we see space here. So \t stands for tab space, and we can use within a string like this. Or even if I don't do this and then still print this out, then also it will work. And then you'll see there is a tab space in between. And this is similar to some of the programming languages that we have. It behaves the same way. Now, let's say we have an apostrophe and and I want to print that out. So how do I do that? Is I use a \, which is basically an escape sequence, and then use it's a new world, right? Right. So if I had not used this, right, this would be an error because we have opened up a single quote and then closed it immediately here, and then there is no parenthesis. So Python would not understand this, and then you would see something like this: an error has occurred. So it says that something is not closed properly, but then we want to print it's a new world, and then we want to use a \, to escape the apostrophe, and then we want to print that out, right? It's a new world, or use a single quote as an apostrophe here just before S. So then I use a \, and then it prints out it's a new world, right? It is a new world, right? That is what it means. So we can print that out. So this is how we'll be able to do it. We'll be able to print a particular string using this kind of \, and the character \. Could also be used for escape sequence as well. All right, folks, if there are any questions till here, we may take them up, or else we'll stop the session for today, and then we'll continue on Monday again. All right, then if there are no questions, thank you so much. Then we'll meet on Monday again.